This is the future of finance. Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Future of Finance podcast. I'm Georges Dyer, and today I'm joined by Sean Penrith, founder and CEO of Gordian Strategies, which is a consulting firm specializing in strategic climate solutions with a focus on climate finance, impact investing, climate solutions strategy and advisory services, and carbon credit development. Before founding Gordian Knot, Sean led the Climate Trust for many years, which focuses on land stewardship to address climate change, using the power of carbon markets and working with landowners to implement climate solutions that improve America's forests and grasslands. We talk about how Gordian Knot works with endowments, foundations, and other investors to integrate these types of climate solutions into their portfolios in ways that fit with their investment risk and return parameters, and how they've been working to improve the integrity of carbon markets with a focus on nature-based solutions like reforestation, grassland management, and protection of other important ecosystems for carbon sequestration like mangroves and peatlands. Sean's a really smart and innovative thinker. It's a great conversation about how to better leverage capital for climate action. So I hope you enjoy it. Please click that follow button if you haven't already and share it with your friends. And now here is Sean. Sean, welcome to the podcast. Thanks so much for joining me. It's great to have you on.
Thank you very much.
So I'm excited to learn more about Gordian Knot Strategies and the work that you've been doing. So why don't you just start there and just tell us just briefly what the firm does and why you started it.
Let me start with the origin story. So I've been in the carbon market, climate policy, impact world for a little over 2 decades. And there was a point in my career where I led the oldest not-for-profit in the US called the Climate Trust, based in Portland, Oregon. And while I was there, along with the team, we launched an impact fund called Climate Trust Capital, which was the early forerunner to the deluge of impact funds that you see every week. There's a new one popping up. But in those days, it was unusual because we were investing specifically in voluntary carbon and regulatory or compliance carbon, which was pretty unusual to do at the time.
Yeah, but what year was that?
Let's see, that was around 2015, 2016.
Okay.
And it was really good to do. It was a very strong initiative, and I really enjoyed it. But what I realized in doing it, so we were investing capital in climate solutions, working with project developers who were generating carbon credits, and then those were being monetized, or we were acquiring them, or sometimes we were selling them on or monetizing them. And anyway, the point of the story is I realized that there was this massive disconnect between people who were developing solutions and people who had capital, and there needed to be this sort of translator, if you will. I started Gordian Knot Strategies in 2018 as a climate finance consultancy. Before that term of art became mainstream. And we set it up so that we could mobilize. Our goal is to mobilize $1 billion a year by 2030. And so we set it up to try and become this translation bridge between the folks that had capital and the people that needed capital to implement these changes. So that was the original intent. The actual work that we do, another way of describing it is we work with people who have money and people that need money. And we design sustainable financing mechanisms for both those types of groups. So we'll design impact investing strategies, we'll help deploy, we'll help curate and create a portfolio or a pipeline of project investment opportunities for impact investors. And then similarly, for those people that are undertaking the solutions, which might be tree planting, it may be re-wetting of peatlands, it may be a blue carbon project, we help design access to long-term sustainable finance. Much of that work involves carbon credits, not always. We do all sorts of things, but there are many times in which the revenue stream that is available to solution developers comes in the form of selling carbon credits.
Yeah, gotcha. And so how do you have clients sort of on both sides, those that have the capital and those that are looking to raise it, or how does that work?
We do, George, but I would say we were pretty strategic in how we went about this. Let me give you a little bit of context. As you can tell, I wasn't born in North America. I'm South African. I actually was born in Zimbabwe and grew up in South Africa.
Hmm.
And the way, when I thought about standing Gordian Knot strategies up, I wanted to have the biggest impact. And so the way that I approached it was to say, if I go after those that have capital, can I create a wider swath of impact as opposed to helping people who need the capital?
Hmm.
And so your question is a good one. I would say it's a 70-30, 70% working with people that have capital, because we can see the opportunity scale is massive. But of course, for those that we can add value, we work with the climate solution developers to help them sell credits, develop strategies, access finance mechanisms. We work in America, South America, Europe, Africa, and Oceania. So we work in all sectors: natural climate solutions, hybrid solutions, technological solutions, although the majority of our focus and passion is around NCS, natural climate solutions.
Hmm. Gotcha. And just one more on the sort of what type of investors do you typically work with? Our network, the Intentional Endowments Network, we work with a lot of endowments and foundations. So those types of groups or other types of institutional asset owners?
Yeah, we have a very interesting makeup of the sort of capital allocators. They include endowments, philanthropies, foundations, impact funds, corporates, corporate funds,
Hmm.
agencies, government agencies, high net worth family offices. So across the spectrum, we do a lot of work with foundations and endowments that are interested in expanding from a pure grant making and program related investments
Hmm.
to actually creating an active, viable impact investing strategy that delivers two things: impact and returns commensurate with what they would earn on their corpus in the market. So that's what we do. Um, I'll flip to the other side. The folks that we work with on the solution side can be very large project developers that are established in the market who have a global footprint, all the way down to literally the landowner in northern Ghana who has 50,000 acres. They want to replant them. The land is degraded. They don't have access to capital. They know they've got a carbon sink there, and they want to figure out how do they do this.
Hmm.
So quite the spectrum.
Yeah, that's great. And I want to get a little more into sort of the projects and some of those mechanisms, whether it's carbon or sort of ecosystem credits and the like that you work in. But just first on the climate finance piece, what are you finding are sort of the motivators? And a lot of what we do is like what you said, trying to get more of the main corpus of these endowments to align with positive
Mm.
impact and recognize the risk return reasons for doing that. And are you seeing more of that happening in sort of the main corpus outside of like the impact or program related investing pools? And what kind of barriers do you see? What are some of the common misperceptions maybe you run up against when you're working with those groups?
Yeah, let me frame the trend, I would say. I think, I've had the luxury of running entrepreneurial businesses around the world and actually leading the Climate Trust, which was a not-for-profit.
Hmm.
So I had the benefit of operating from a not-for-profit vantage point. And in that role, and in this current role as CEO of Gordian, we do work with a lot of philanthropists and foundations. I would say there has been a positive shift in the sense that a decade ago, we were talking about having an impact where foundations and philanthropies and so on would invest in bespoke projects that resonated with them. They were a water quality project, they were an education project, or whatever it is. That slowly shifted, thankfully, away from what I call the snowflake approach. I'm not denigrating it, I'm just saying that the scale is limited
Hmm.
to language that revolved around the need and interest to be catalytic. And in that language, it was couched around having catalytic grant making programs or program related investments. but it hadn't, or it didn't morph into we should have an impact investing program. That's a more recent development. There are some leading foundations, as you know, that are committing 60, 70, 80% of their corpus to impact, which is terrific. But they are the leaders / outliers. The folks that we work with are slowly moving towards the notion that they can achieve the impact and returns. But the hurdles are getting the board on board, getting the investment committee comfortable with. The biggest challenge with investing for impact is it's fragmented, it's murky, it's not standardized. It's like the old days of the renewable energy business, or the old days of energy efficiency. I used to be in high performance and energy efficiency. Before we had feed-in tariffs, before we had rebates and incentives, all that, it was very difficult to make a project pencil. And that's sort of what the perception is from those forward-thinking foundations that say, I actually want to do something. And so what we do with them is we do an assessment and we determine viability for them to get them comfortable. Then we do a pilot. The pilot moves to round 1, round 2, and it's always scaling and demonstrating success. There's not enough capital. I mean, you know, there's 2% of philanthropic capital around the world goes to natural climate solutions. 2%. If you look at the balance sheets of these organizations, I mean, we would have more than enough capital, which I'll address in another topic, because there is a role for that capital. But let me stop there. Hopefully that answered your question.
For sure. And I guess just a little more about the returns. And maybe we can come back to this when you tell us more about the strategies. But when you go in and talk about like they can get comparable market rate returns, what asset class do these strategies typically fall into? And does that message typically resonate, or is it tough to break through some of that doubt?
Well, yeah. So first of all, and you'll be familiar with this. Foundations have kind of a spending rule. So there'll be a 4%, 2% plus inflation. So they'll say, okay, we're going to draw down 6% per annum, and that will cover our overhead. So as long as our corpus maintains that. So for entities that we work with, it's basically treasury plus 2% is the minimum hurdle that we go for. So with the client, we determine risk tolerance, hurdle thresholds, sectoral preferences, and things like that. When we take them through the process where we issue the RFP, we rank them, take them through term sheet and due diligence. What we're doing is we're always filtering that pipeline of interested capital applicants to meet those prerequisite investment policy specs that have been set up by the client. But to your question, is it a hard sell and so on? I mean, yeah, because the climate investment solution space just doesn't have a large enough archive of demonstrable success. It is large, it's just not cataloged. It's very difficult to access it. I mean, if you wanted to look up right now, give me the top 20 peatland projects in the Northern Hemisphere, it would be difficult to track down. So the barrier is really, in our approach anyway, it's stair-stepping the risk tolerance and the scale of the impact program to demonstrate success. And then it's all about balancing the portfolio that they ultimately invest in to say, okay, we've got a little bit of high risk here, but we got some standardized risk over here. Across the board, it meets the tolerance. But it's I had 2 calls last week with foundations who are contemplating. I mean, the good news, people are contemplating impact programs. This is fantastic. The question is, where do I start? What tools do I need? How do I evaluate? How do I deal originate? And what terms do I need to think about? Right. That's good for us because we can be helpful because we've done it before. But it's confusing. It reminds me a lot, George, of you and I sit here and we go, you know what? We want to use AI to, I don't know, do something around podcasts. The spectrum and plethora of AI tools, it's mind-numbing, right? I mean, I wouldn't know where to start. Well, that's what climate finance is. It's kind of exactly the same.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And it is great to hear those trends, though, and the interest. And hopefully, with any sort of nascent or early stage market, that they'll get more clarity and frameworks. And it sounds like that's some of the good work you're doing. But tell us, like, for those who aren't familiar with nature-based solutions and how they're investable, just tell us kind of the basics of what that means, what that looks like, and maybe some of the examples of like project types that you're helping to look
Yeah.
at.
Yeah. So at its essence, a nature-based solution is one that it needs to do a few different things. At its essence, for it to be investable, if you wanted to access revenue streams, let's say from the carbon market, at its essence, it must show measurable, high integrity carbon mitigation at its fundamental level. The second thing it needs to do, and this is the term that we don't like, it is what's used in the market. It's been referred to as co-benefits. Co-benefits, we like the term core benefits because they are core. Core benefits are additional attributes from a solution that, for example, would improve alongside the carbon mitigation, would improve air quality, or it could improve water quality, or it can improve biodiversity. So you got your carbon at the heart of the matter, you've got your co-benefits. And then the third thing it needs to do, which I don't group into core benefits because it's fundamental, and that is that it must have a benefit sharing and community social safeguards mechanism. Because at the end of the day, when you look at, we'll take emerging markets and developing economies, excluding China, they represent 40% of the potential to reach our climate targets. If we just focus on EMDEs, the problem is, like all markets, when people see that there's a capitalistic opportunity, people have come into these carbon baskets of the world and put projects in place that haven't always benefited the community. So that's why it's a 1, 2, 3. It's carbon, core benefits, and to make sure of the community aspect. The examples are, they vary, but the simplest example is afforestation or reforestation. So taking a parcel of land that has been degraded or has never been planted and planting it with trees. Another one is regenerative grasslands, where you use adaptive and rotational grazing to improve the health of the grasslands, improve the health of the livestock, and improve the soil organic carbon levels and soil resilience of the land. You have things like mangrove restoration, which are huge carbon sinks. You've got peatlands re-wetting. So there's a whole host of natural climate solutions. The challenge with them, this is the sort of the nub of the issue, is they all require time for the carbon benefit to accrue, but many of them require upfront investment to actually undertake the intervention. So if you and I wanted to plant 100,000 acres in Zimbabwe today, we have to buy the seeds, we have to pay the labor, we've got to figure out how to access the land, and then we'll plant the trees, and only at year 7, 8, or 9 do we actually start seeing measurable carbon accruing that could be turned into some sort of ecosystem service asset like a carbon credit that we can sell. But we need all that capital up front. And in the carbon market, it has been very traditional that buyers pay on delivery.
Mm-hmm.
It's a more recent occurrence in the last few years in which project developers are saying to the buyer, can you pay us some amount up front and the rest on delivery so that we can cover our costs? And that is the essential challenge with financing nature-based solutions, is this mismatch between the temporal aspect and when capital is actually needed.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. And so, again, just to put a finer point on it for people who aren't as familiar, all of those nature-based solutions, the planting of trees, integrated grasslands management and the like, pulls carbon from the atmosphere. That
Correct.
Yeah, and
Yes.
stores it for
Yes.
some measure of time, and then that carbon can be in the form of a credit sold or traded. I guess kind of coming to that aspect of it, the carbon markets, as you mentioned, there's voluntary carbon markets and compliance carbon markets. Do you work in both? And maybe just speak a little bit. There's been lots of critiques of carbon markets over the years from both angles of the voluntary and compliance side. But yeah, just tell us the basics of where you work, and then maybe we'll get into some of those critiques.
Yeah. So I spent a lot of time when we had Climate Trust Capital, spent a lot of time in both the voluntary and the compliance market. as Gordian Strategies, we monitor all carbon markets, voluntary and compliance. What we mean by compliance is a regulated market set up by a jurisdiction or a government in a country. All right, so it's a distinct from the voluntary market, which is purely voluntary in action. So we monitor both. What we're seeing, which is interesting, is that while you have the voluntary carbon market under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, you have this ability to create what they call ITMOs, which are internationally transferable mitigation outcomes. It's shorthand for international credits, where a host country can develop a project or develop some sort of carbon mitigation program, quantify those, turn those into ITMOs through a process that they call using corresponding adjustments, and basically sell those ITMOs to, let's say, Switzerland or Sweden. Now, what's interesting about that is that there are project operators in these countries that are developing voluntary projects that are now working with the host government to take those voluntary carbon credits, to turn them into ITMOs, to then sell abroad. So you see this interesting merging, essentially, of the voluntary market with the Article 6 market, which we could sort of call a quasi regulatory market, because of course the Paris Agreement, it's an agreement, but the markets, it's not enforceable. The NDCs, or the nationally determined contribution plans for each country, are voluntary targets that they put together. But what is exciting is to see this convergence between the VCM and the ITMO market. I did want to talk a little bit about the integrity of the market and so on. Look, without a doubt, we've had the market has had its bruised eyes and bruised knuckles, without a doubt. There's been some bad actors, bad projects. So I don't defend that. I will say, though, and we've written extensively about this, when you look at industries like the mortgage industry, when you look at industries like the renewable energy industry, all of them had naysayers, skeptics, people that railed against the efficacy of these solutions. And so I don't dismiss the issues. I just say these are signs of a growing market. Right now, the market has mobilized. We've contributed to this effort to create a voluntary carbon market roadmap 2.0, if you will, or a VCM plus, to re-engineer a market that addresses these fundamental issues that need rectifying, so that we do have a liquid, scalable market. That's another sign of a market that's maturing. The biggest challenge I've got, George, here's the problem, is that we've got a situation where people that are buying or investing into carbon projects, and I know you've heard this before, but I can't help myself, who are investing into this stuff, they are delivering credits, they're using the best available standards, registries, methodologies, measurement and reporting, verification, and so on, and they're actually doing something. Yes, can it improve? Yes, 100%. But those are the people that are lambasted. And the people that are doing nothing, no comment. That is atrocious.
Yeah, it's too often the way in things like this. There's no good deed goes unpunished, right? It's,
exactly.
Well, in terms of some of the integrity, like we don't need to go through every piece, but in your mind, like what do you think is sort of the most difficult one to address? Permanence is one in nature-based, where like if you plant a forest, it burns down, or somehow that carbon is released, even though that wasn't part of the plan. Or additionality, like some of these projects might have happened otherwise without the market. So is there one or two that you find are really like tricky to address? Or
well, we could have a conversation about additionality. For better or for worse, there is this definition of financial additionality, but for the existence of carbon revenues, the project wouldn't have gone forward. Can it be improved? Yes. I mean, I worked with the Integrity Council for the voluntary carbon market for about a year and a half as they were setting up their assessment framework. And these were thorny issues that they grappled with. For us, the number one concern, challenge, thing that we need to solve is the permanence issue, because for nature-based solutions, that is where people have the most issues, quite rightly so. So just to be clear, what permanence means is that if I undertake some sort of action, I plant a tree, and I then sequester a ton of carbon over the life of that tree or every certain period, can I count on that ton of carbon being sequestered for, and the benchmark is roughly 100 years, okay? Or a million, yeah. And that's where nature-based solutions really struggle. While we have provisions to account for reversal, if the forest burns down, we have a buffer pool that we can draw from that is stipulated by the registry under their methodology. But that's the fundamental nut to crack. And I will say there's some really exciting things underway. I mean, people are looking at an insurance. There are other things that the American Forest Foundation is working on, which is called a permanence trust. So there are different mechanisms literally in play right now being developed in which we can hopefully sigh a huge sigh of relief to say we've settled the permanent thing. Now let's get on with saving our carbon sinks in the world that are disappearing like this every day while we fiddle around on the definition of things.
Well, that's exciting, though. It is good to see just innovative solutions like that or mechanisms that can help address it. And there's a timing issue too, right? One more question on how it actually works when you're working with these asset owners to invest in these credits. Are you helping them like facilitate direct purchases or allocate to funds that are investing in several different types of projects, or just how does the mechanics kind of work?
Yeah, again, it's a spectrum. So at the simplest level, I would say, the clients that we work with that are interested in allocating capital, what they'll do is we'll basically manage their procurement process. So sometimes we'll do it on a blind basis, so the suppliers don't even know who we're representing, but we'll manage that solicitation process. We'll review all the proposals, we'll rate them, we'll take them through screening, then we take them through due diligence, and then we take them through term sheet all the way through to contracting. And we've tens of millions of credits we've taken down that path. Some people are interested in investing in a fund or even a fund of funds. And what they'll do is they'll ask us to assess the risk of the fund's mandate, of its approach. The biggest challenge with funds, and I know this from Climate Trust Capital and the road wreckages that have been along the way, deal origination is a very expensive proposition. Because the impact environment is made up of many different project types, different geographies, and so on, people can spend a lot of their origination budget on trying to find the right deals. They have to come up to speed on the domain, on the expertise level of the domain. And so that's when they often bring us in and say, we don't have time or the interest to get up to speed. Just tell us whether these guys are on the right direction, what are the concerns, and then we'll give them recommendations, all the way down to actually designing an SPV fund for a client, where we'll design the structure, the investment mandate, we'll identify their recruitment strategy, and so on. So it's a spectrum, I would say.
That's exciting. Nice. I want to kind of pull back the lens a little bit. And, a lot of what we're talking about is the need for systems change to address the climate crisis. And we talk a lot about how to employ systems thinking for investors into thinking about their whole portfolio, the whole economy, where it's heading, and sort of their role in that. And would love to hear how you think about that if you work with your clients and sort of understanding systems and driving system level change.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. All the work that we do, regardless of the exact size of the scope of work, what we endeavor to do is to ensure that the client that we're working with understands how the interconnectedness of this particular aspect fits in with the larger ecosystem. Because in that sense, the biggest source of friction that we see is the lack of a systems thinking approach. And the example, I was just in London at a investment summit, and this topic came up, and I shared this analogy or this perspective, which I really like. So in the late 90s, Deutsche Bank basically came out with a paper that examined how to create markets. It doesn't matter what market, just like how do you create a market? And what I loved about their conclusion was that you need TLC. So you need transparency, you need longevity, and you need certainty. And the paper describes how each of those three elements essentially form a massive ecosystem. You need from A to Z to achieve these three outcomes. Because if you don't have TLC, no capital is going to come to the party.
Hmm.
And that's for the voluntary carbon roadmap, VCM roadmap that we worked on earlier in the year. We looked at the characteristics for the derivative market, for the bond market, and the commodity market.
Hmm.
And we said, what is it about these three markets that has them at the scale they operate, at the liquidity and the interoperability, or the cross-border ability? And we map those parameters against the impact arena, and we see huge holes, obviously.
Hmm.
So coming back to your question on systems thinking, and I think in your notes you point this out, but the challenge we've got is the short-term financial horizons for traditional finance
Hmm.
have no ability or no latitude, even if they want to. And we hear this over and over. They don't have the authority, the directive to consider anything longer than the short-term horizons. They can't think about impact and fiscal returns and so on. And so they don't see the connectedness between investing for the good plus returns. The other thing that investors struggle with is perceived risk. When they look at the climate solutions sector writ large, they understandably see a lot of risk. What we need to do to bring the ecosystem together is to deliver, like we've done with other industries over and over. I mean, that's how the country, the US, was built, using treasury bonds. What's a treasury bond? A treasury bond is a guaranteed debt note. What does that mean? It means the note was issued with a credit enhancement or a guarantor behind it to de-risk, in the eyes of the bond investor, the investment. When you look at capital that's interested in going into the impact space, there is no real credit enhancement provision. Although we do it at an international scale through World Bank,
Hmm.
MEGA, DFC, we don't have anything at the project level. We're actually trying to build a credit enhancement facility for nature-based solutions so we can tap into green bond finance. But to do that, you need a willing pool of participants that say, we'll pledge, we'll guarantee that in the event there's default. But coming back to my point, when you look at a robust and functioning ecosystem, you need that credit enhancement, or that risk mitigation. You need vibrancy or robustness of markets, which we recognize as a challenge with carbon markets, because we've got different standards and different registries and so on and so on.
Hmm.
I think we'll get there. I'm pretty optimistic and positive that we'll get there. It's just a lot of work. It
Yeah.
has been a lot of work. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, that's exciting about the credit enhancement facility, and also what you were saying about the, the ability to trade those credits under the Paris Agreement. What were they called again? ITMOs?
It was,
ITMOs.
yeah.
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 Because I didn't realize that. I wasn't familiar with that, but that sounds like a pretty strong sign that could help harmonize the various carbon markets around the world as more are developed, and that sort of, as you said, like quasi-compliance market could really help tie them together. That's going to be a huge
Exactly.
step. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. And what do you think? We work with a lot of higher ed endowments and also the academic side of those institutions, and we see a real need for this type of systems thinking to be integrated into business education, economics departments. Obviously, the work you're doing is helping to educate practitioners,
Mm.
on the ground. But yeah, do you speak at business schools at all? Do you get back? Do you see ways that we might help enhance this type of thinking in students that are going to come out and be the next generation of leaders?
Yeah, so I'm invited to speak at various points to all sorts of capstone students and MBA graduates and so on.
Hmm.
Um, the questions they have are very similar to what we're talking about here, which is, I want to do good, but I don't know where to insert myself. And this is the thing. When people want to enter the climate finance world, where do they start? I mean, it's very difficult to track down, the Wharton School of Climate Finance or whatever it is.
Hmm.
And so we have a tremendous amount of interns applying to us to say, just put me to work for 8 months because I just want to learn.
Yeah.
So I think there's a huge opportunity for the youth to get engaged. I think the challenge is equipping them with the pathways and equipping them with the tools that they'll need. There are many economic and finance graduates that come to us. They want to get into climate change, but they've got the financial skills without a doubt, but when it comes to like, okay, we want to model a financial yield of a mangrove that's been degraded for 50 years, and we want to put together the model that would attract investment. It's just a different. It's just a different discipline, I would say.
Yeah, and just how to
Yeah,
how to bring more of this thing. I mean, to your point there, it's like we see a need for transdisciplinary education where those economics majors can also understand biology so that they can model some of those types of things, for example.
yeah,
But yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. I think um, there hasn't been, coming back to the point, the systems thinking, there hasn't been the system thinking approach to say, okay, let's look at the um, sort of the fundamental education system, and what are the insertion points and opportunities to weave in the climate aspect of it. Where can we put that in? It just doesn't exist. I know that my daughter is a sustainable designer. She went to University of Oregon, and she was really interested in embedding more climate sustainability into her curriculum, but it was tough to. I mean,
Hmm.
they did a great job in the design aspect, but it was tough to hunt down extra materials. So I think that's the opportunity for us that want to impart or deliver this type of education to the resources to the youth. We've got to figure out how to put it in front of them. Because
Hmm.
I'll tell you, when they call us, they know they want to get involved, but they just sort of bewildered is the term. They don't know where to start.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely a lot of work to be done there still on the higher ed side. I had one other question is on public policy. I'm curious, you talked a lot about like the developing market and some of the standards and frameworks that need to be put into place. But is there just a couple key policy changes that you really think would help accelerate you know, these transitions to more regenerative systems?
Yeah, massive. I mean, coming back to my example of the renewable market, renewable was a challenging market, notwithstanding the cost of silicon and so on, because it was voluntary. There were a couple of incentive schemes across the country, but nothing was harmonized. And then suddenly, you had the renewable portfolio standard, just like that. States started
Hmm.
adopting these RPSs, and and then we couple that with an instrument, a power purchase agreement, where somebody could basically sell the renewable power. And once a solar developer or renewable energy developer had a PPA in hand or in sight, they could raise capital. It was a project finance. So I think when I look at what policy can do, the simplest thing is, obviously, if we had a price on carbon, that would be huge.
Hmm.
But the simplest opportunity I've seen, and it's been talked about but never quite crossed the line, and that is that if we had a procurement strategy for the government, the agencies, the branches, whatever you want to reference, where let's say, for example, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, if they recognize their role was to help be a market maker in these emerging ecosystem markets, can they set targets and actually be the buyer of last resort, and then acquire those assets as towards their target? That would be fundamental overnight, like fundamental. It's not quite an RPS, but it's very, very close. Of course, if they pass statewide, I mean, state by state carbon targets like California, that would be huge. So I think putting a price in carbon, and then as part of the procurement process of these agencies, that they embed carbon would be absolutely huge.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but the market's trying to thrive despite all of that, which is problematic. And I think anything they do would be huge. Coming back to the American Forest Foundation once more, they penned the Rural Forest Market Act a couple of years ago, and what that did was, the attempt was to authorize USDA to have $150 million worth of guarantee authority to guarantee debt towards climate solutions.
Hmm.
That would have been absolutely small, not a lot, but it would have been instrumental. Because of that, I'm working on this credit enhancement facility, because we were not able to get that across the finish line with
Right.
AFF. I said,
Gotcha.
okay, well, we'll just
Yeah,
build this
do
thing.
it yourself. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Huh. Well, hopefully we can get some good policies going before too long here.
Yeah.
Sean, just a few kind of final questions in quick succession here as we wrap up. Obviously, I know we talked about some of what you do. You do a lot. Is there one sort of climate solution that you're particularly excited about the potential right now?
There isn't actually one solution. I would say the thing that excites me the most um, is the ability to mobilize real capital at scale to target climate solutions in emerging markets and developing economies, because it is really the first time that we have this two-way valve of we've got an asset in these developing countries
Hmm.
that's valuable, and they need capital, so we export the goods and we get the capital, and so that excites me, the ability to put capital to work in these, obviously because I'm from South Africa, and that's near and dear to my heart.
Hmm.
If you had to pinpoint me down to a solution, I'm very, very we track peatlands very closely. We're very concerned about permafrost and peatlands overall because of the flywheel effect that as we lose that sequestration, it's difficult to recapture. And then oceans, like everything to
Yeah.
do with oceans is fascinating to me. Iron ore fertilization, macroalgae, all of that is hugely interesting to me. It's untapped. We've got so much activity in improved forest management and afforestation, reforestation, and grasslands, but we haven't even begun to see the opportunity space really in oceans and peatlands, I'd say.
Yeah, those are great points. Definitely often overlooked. How about a book or podcast, an article, some resource that you think that our listeners would enjoy if they want to learn more about this stuff?
Oh, well, we have a great podcast called Untangling Climate Finance, as you well know.
Yeah.
I would say, well, I'll talk about the first book that I ever read in the space, which is still valid today, and it was kind of a turning point. It was years ago. It was called Carbon. It was by Ricardo Bayon and a few of his fellow authors who I can't remember, but it was when he was with Eco Assets. And then more recently, Richard Lawrence, who is the husband of Dee Lawrence, who runs the High Tide Foundation, has just written a wonderful book on carbon. So I'd definitely check that out.
Hmm.
Um, let's see. I don't actually listen to a lot of podcasts. I tend to read books more.
Hmm.
So
Well, that's
I
great.
don't have a.
Those are a couple of good recommendations. And the Untangling Climate Finance podcast that you all do, I was going to give it a plug if you didn't, because it is
Thank you.
great. And so I definitely encourage people to check it out and go deeper on all of this. How about on a personal level, when you're not working on creating these markets and all of these climate solutions, what might we find you doing?
Well, we're avid sailors. When COVID hit, my wife and I had always talked about sailing one day. I sailed across the Atlantic around Cape Horn through Pacific, and
Wow.
we'd always talked about going sailing one day. And then we were coming back along the Columbia River because we lived in Portland, Oregon, during COVID on our small sailboat. And she said, if you get a bigger sailboat, we could go sailing right now because what better opportunity?
Right.
A month later, we had sold the house, the boats, the cars. Obviously, the
Wow.
kids weren't in school, and we went sailing on a 42-foot sloop, homeschooling the kids, running the business from the boat. It was absolutely wonderful. We sold the boat in Seattle about a year and a half ago now, but it was an amazing time. But to answer your question,
Incredible.
what would you find me doing? It's like everything to do with boats. Like
Yeah.
sailing is my thing.
That's awesome. Where did you all go during that pandemic time?
So we basically sailed up and down the West Coast. Spent a lot of time in the San Juan Islands because I was
Oh
getting
yeah.
the boat ready to go all the way down to Mexico, and then we're going to go through Panama, through the Caribbean, up to the Mediterranean. That was the plan.
Yeah.
And so I reset the mast. I did a ton of stuff on this boat, like a lot, and it was hard to decide to sell her. But the couple that bought the boat ended up taking Salacia, I believe, down to Mexico. So she got to where she was supposed to go.
Nice.
Yeah,
That's great. My wife's actually from Vancouver, so we've spent some times in those islands in the Pacific Northwest, and they're just
it's
absolutely gorgeous.
it's like a jewel, like
Yeah.
an and yeah, it's just fantastic.
Incredible, incredible. So, all right, one final question here that we ask all our guests. Given the work that you do and understanding the financial system, what is your vision for the future of finance if we were to address all these sustainability challenges?
That's simple. That we actually have a financial system that values environmental impact and fiscal. That's it. I mean, it's nothing. If we're able to do that, we've got a shot.
Oh, yeah, a lot of problems get solved through that. Beautiful. Well, Sean, thank you again for taking the time and for all the amazing work you are doing and have done over the course of your career. It's really impressive and inspiring. So thank you, and hope we talk again soon.
Thank you. Really appreciate it, man. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks for tuning in for the Future of Finance podcast. We hope you found today's conversation insightful and inspiring. Don't forget to subscribe or follow us on your favorite podcast platform. And please take a moment to rate, review, or share the show. All of this really helps us to reach more people like you who care about creating a thriving and sustainable future. And it's a really easy way to have a big impact. So please do follow. A quick disclaimer, the content of this podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute investment advice. Investments and strategies discussed may not be suitable for all listeners. Please consult a financial, legal, tax, or accounting professional before making any investment decisions. References to managers and funds are for informational purposes only and should not be considered endorsements or investment solicitations. This podcast does not monitor fund performance or guarantee the accuracy of third-party materials or statements. This has been an episode of the Future of Finance podcast, exploring how finance can shape a vibrant and sustainable future. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.